"You don't belong at this table." Mother-in-law said it loud enough for the whole dining room to hear, right before she found out I owned the house we were sitting in. If you've never heard a story like this before, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now let's get into it. My name is Rachel Voss, and for 6 years, I was the daughter-in-law nobody in the Ashford family wanted to claim. I want to be clear about something before I tell you what happened at that dinner table. I never set out to prove anyone wrong. I just wanted to survive a family that had decided, long before they met me, that I wasn't good enough for their son. I married Daniel Ashford when I was 26. He was a contractor, steady hands, quiet eyes, the kind of man who noticed when you were tired before you said a word. His family had money, old money, the kind that built half the housing developments in our county, and they never let me forget that I hadn't come from any of it. I'd grown up the daughter of a widowed home health aide, working weekend shifts at a diner to help with rent since I was 15. When Daniel brought me home to meet his parents, his mother, Colleen Ashford, looked at my chipped manicure and said, "Well, at least she's hardworking," in the tone you'd use to compliment a good work mule. Colleen ran that family like a courtroom where she was judge, jury, and the only witness anyone believed. Daniel's father, Walter, had died 4 years before I ever showed up, and in his absence, Colleen had appointed herself the sole authority on who deserved what in the Ashford name. Daniel's younger sister, Priscilla, took her cues from their mother the way a compass takes its cue from north, automatically, without question, and always pointing in the same direction. For 6 years I was tolerated. Not welcomed, tolerated. I brought casseroles to Sunday dinners that no one thanked me for. I sat through birthdays where gifts were handed to everyone but me. By accident, every single year. I watched Daniel try, quietly and constantly, to close the gap between his mother and his wife. And I watched that gap stay exactly the same width no matter what either of us did. Then, 8 months ago, Daniel died. A construction accident. A scaffold that should have been inspected and wasn't. I won't spend long on this part, because there are things that don't get easier just because you say them out loud enough times. What I will say is that in the space of one Tuesday afternoon, I went from being someone's wife to being a 32-year-old widow standing in a hospital corridor while Colleen Ashford looked at me like I was somehow responsible for weather. The funeral was the first sign of what was coming. Colleen sat in the front pew and didn't save me a seat. Priscilla gave the eulogy and mentioned Daniel's childhood, his college years, his career, and never once said my name. I sat in the third row of my own husband's funeral like a distant cousin nobody could quite place. 3 weeks after we buried him, Colleen called a family dinner. She said it was time to settle things properly, as a family. I should have known from her voice that settling things didn't mean what it sounds like. The dinner was at the house on Larkspur Lane, the house Daniel and I had bought together 4 years earlier, the house where we'd planned to raise the kids we never got the chance to have. Colleen had a key. She'd always had a key, ever since the day we moved in, because Daniel could never say no to his mother about anything, including giving her unrestricted access to our home. I'd let it go for 4 years, because fighting that particular battle never seemed worth what it would cost. I walked into my own dining room that night to find Colleen already seated at the head of the table, Daniel's old seat, with Priscilla beside her, and Priscilla's husband, Gordon, across from them. There was a folder in front of Colleen, thick, official-looking, the kind of folder that means someone has been planning something, for longer than they're admitting. "Sit down, Rachel," Colleen said. "Not please sit down. Just an instruction, the way you'd speak to hired help." I sat. Colleen opened the folder and slid a stack of papers toward me. She explained in the calm, over-articulated voice she used when she wanted to make sure everyone understood she was being reasonable, that the family had consulted an estate attorney, that given Daniel's passing, and given that I had no children to consider, and no blood relation to the Ashford name, it made sense, practically, financially, for everyone's sake, for me to sign over my interest in the Larkspur Lane property to the family trust. She said Priscilla and Gordon were expecting their second child and could use the extra space. She said it like she was doing me a favor by not asking me to leave that same night. "You don't belong at this table, Rachel," she said, when I didn't immediately reach for the pen. "You were never really one of us. Let's not pretend this is your house." Gordon nodded along like he was watching a business presentation. Priscilla didn't look at me at all. She looked at the papers, already rearranging the nursery in her head. Here's what none of them knew. 2 years before Daniel died, We'd refinanced the Larkspur Lane house. Daniel's construction business had hit a rough patch, and to protect what we'd built, our attorney had restructured the deed so the property was held in a living trust, with me listed as sole trustee and sole beneficiary in the event of his death. Daniel had done it quietly, on purpose. He knew his mother. He'd told me once, half joking and half not, if anything ever happens to me, I don't want my mother deciding what happens to our home. I hadn't understood. Back then, how much he meant that. I understood it completely now. I let Colleen finish her whole speech. I let her slide the papers all the way across the table, and then I reached into my bag and took out a folder of my own. Before I sign anything, I said, I think you should all see this. I laid the trust documents on the table next to hers. I watched Colleen's eyes move across the page. The recording date, the notarization, Daniel's signature, my name as sole trustee and beneficiary. I watched the exact moment the color left her face. This house isn't part of any Ashford family trust, I said. It hasn't been for 2 years. It's mine, fully. Daniel made sure of that before he died, because he knew exactly how this dinner was going to go, even if he never lived to see it. The room went very quiet. Gordon actually reached over and turned the paper around to read it himself, like he thought I might be bluffing. Priscilla's mouth opened and nothing came out. Colleen tried to recover. She said there must be some mistake, that Daniel would never have done something like this without telling her, that she wanted her own attorney to review it. I told her she was welcome to what the recording was public record at the county clerk's office, dated and filed 2 years ago, long before any of us sat down at that table. Then I told her the part that actually mattered. I've spent 6 years being told I wasn't really family. Fine, I heard you. I'm not asking you to change your mind about that now. I closed my folder, but this is my house, bought with money I earned and money Daniel earned, and I decide who sits at this table going forward. Tonight, that's not you. Colleen didn't leave quietly. She said I was punishing her in her grief, that I was turning her son's memory into a weapon. I told her that a weapon is something you use against someone, and all I'd done was refuse to hand over my own home to a woman who, 3 weeks after burying her son, had walked into my dining room with a folder full of paperwork, designed to make me homeless before. I'd finished grieving him too. Priscilla and Gordon left first. Colleen stood in the doorway for a long moment, like she was waiting for me to call her back, to apologize, to fold the way I always had before. I didn't. I just held the door until she walked through it. That was 5 months ago. I still live in that house. I planted a garden this spring in the backyard. Daniel and I always talked about and never got around to. Colleen has called twice, not to apologize, but to ask very carefully whether I'd consider reconsidering the family's position. I haven't called back. I think about something Daniel said to me once. Early in our marriage, after a particularly bad Sunday dinner, he said, "You don't have to earn your place in a family that keeps moving the finish line." I didn't understand it then. I understand it now. He wasn't just talking about his mother, and he was already protecting the version of our life he wouldn't be alive to see. He gave me a home nobody could take from me, and he gave me the paperwork to prove it. On the one night I'd need it most, here's what I keep coming back to. Colleen spent 6 years deciding what I was worth based on where I came from. She looked at my chipped manicure at 26, and never once revised the opinion she formed in that first minute. And in the end, the thing that actually determined what happened in that dining room wasn't her opinion of me at all. It was a decision my husband made quietly, out of love, 2 years before he needed anyone to know about it. We don't always get to choose how people see us, but sometimes the people who love us are already protecting the parts of our future we can't protect ourselves. If this story hit home for you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe so you're here for the next one. We'll see you then.